Hey guys, welcome to another episode of my 2025 wrap-up. This is actually going to be our final episode. I'm going to go ahead and do November and December in one day. So we're going to talk about all the books that I read in November, what I rated them and why, and the ones I've read so far in December, because I think I'm going to finish one more before the year ends, but we're going to do our best to get as many of them in there as I can. We're gonna go ahead and start with November. In November, I read 5 books and I loved most of them. I think I gave 3 of the 5 stars. So first we read Come and Get It by Kylie Reid. I actually listened to this as an audiobook on my drive home from Texas to Florida. This is my first Kylie Reid book and I picked it up. I was just kind of looking at audiobooks on Libby because I knew I had a 12-hour drive ahead of me and I was like, what am I going to listen to? Because I was not feeling my music. I'd already listened to that on the drive to Texas. So I stumbled across her audiobook. It was available at that moment. I was like, why not? Let's check it out. I went into this completely blind, had no expectations. I'd never heard a review. I'd heard of it, like I'd seen it on people's TikToks, but I hadn't actually paid attention to what it was about. This is one of the books I gave 5 stars. There are so many things to think about and talk about that I'm not sure what I can say without saying like a spoiler. But the premise is basically we have a young nanny, I think her name was Amara, and she goes into a grocery store late at night with her charge and is accused of kidnapping by a white security guard. What the rest of the book, that happens in like the first chapter, the rest of the book is everything that unfolds from that incident. And it is insane. It is dual POV, so it's Amara and then her boss at the time, the one that she nannies for. And oh my god, parts of it literally read like a thriller. Like I was listening and every few minutes, all I could think of was like, what the actual hell am I reading? Like what is going on? What is wrong with this person? I don't want to say too much because I feel like this book is best experienced blind, where you really don't know what to expect or what's happening. All I can say is this is one of the best books I read in 2025. It's going to be up there on my year ranking list, and I think everybody should read it, especially because of the implications and examinations of white savior complexes and racism, stereotyping, etc. Immediately following Such a Fun Age, I checked out Come and Get It by Kylie Reid because I loved Such a Fun Age so much. I was like, let's read her next book. I rated Come and Get It 4 stars. It was a commentary on power imbalances and stuff like and female friendship, as well as privilege. The book opens up with a very interesting scene where one of the main characters is interviewing 3 young women at the University of Arkansas, I believe it was, and at first she starts like asking them questions about weddings because she's doing some study for a book that she wants to write, and she then decides she's going to gear her study more towards how young women at the University of Arkansas handle money. It was a fascinating read. Again, Kylie Reid definitely focused on and examined the racial aspect of it, but she also brought into play the like homophobia, power imbalances because of age and stuff like that, as well as positions that people hold. Also, just the way that she wrote Millie, the female main character of the book, was so fascinating because she was so multifaceted and had so many thoughts and beliefs and such a deep personality. I love reading characters that are like real women, because sometimes when I'm reading, the characters feel so 2D, especially female characters, and the way that Kylie Reid wrote Millie was fabulous. Moving on, my book club book for the month was Circe by Madeline Miller. Gave her 5 stars. Earlier this year, I read The Song of Achilles and it was devastating. It was so devastating. It was so good. It was so beautiful, and I loved the way that Madeline Miller wrote. Going into Circe, I was not sure what to expect. I really don't know much about Greek mythology or tales or anything like that. So I go into it like it's its own completely original novel. I don't compare it to the original myths or anything like that. I rated Circe 5 stars. It was an amazing story about women, as well as the dynamics of relationships and hobbies, personal growth. Beautiful story. I devoured it. I think I read it in one day because I just couldn't put it down after a certain point. Next, we have Good Spirits by B.K. Borison. I rated this book 3.5 stars. It was my lowest rated read from November. Not because it's a bad book, but like we saw with a few different romance books that I've rated over this past year, it just fell flat in certain parts and wasn't very memorable. When I'm reading a romance book and it's dual perspective, I have a really hard time with a male perspective that really sexualizes our main character. And it's not that she was over-sexualized, but it just, I don't know how to explain it. It just wasn't like I don't want to read about that, if that makes sense. I didn't go into it expecting that, and I probably should have. Also, one thing that we both noticed was it was kind of a story of like, she didn't accept or love herself until this man did. And sometimes in a romance novel, I'll get that moment where it clicks and she figures things out on her own and goes back and fixes it, like Just for the Summer by Abby Jimenez or People We Meet on Vacation by Emily Henry. But in this, it just did not feel like our main character, Harriet, came to that conclusion on her own. It did feel very pushed because of him, which doesn't have to be a bad thing, but I like to read. I don't like to read about women who figure themselves out thanks to a man. Like, oh, he loves me, so I must be okay. But that's just how I personally felt, and if you don't feel that way, fantastic. I'm glad that you enjoyed it as much as you did. Finally, in the month of November, I read Educated by Tara Westover. I rated this book 5 stars. This was a memoir. It was the first memoir I read this year. And oh my goodness, it read like a novel. You know, she was telling us her story. And the story starts with she lives on essentially a plot of land with her Mormon family. And her dad's giving like, I don't want to say crazy because like he is, but I feel like that doesn't fully explain to you guys what I'm trying to impart. He doesn't believe in medicine or doctors. They don't have a phone. He doesn't send his kids to school. Like, he thinks the government is out to get them. That's what we're working with, you know. This was a fascinating read, and it really focuses on the power of education and how powerful and important that was to helping Tara Westover escape the abuse and harm that her family was causing her. I got so emotional during so many parts of reading this. It was insane. It was one of the best books I read this year, which I feel like you guys have heard me say a ton in the last couple of videos because I've really loved the books I read at the end of this year. Those are the 5 books that I read in November. Now we're gonna go ahead and move on to the books I finished in December so far. Okay, we've changed locations because my other sister just got diagnosed with strep and I was in her room filming. So we're in my baby sister's room right now. And we're gonna go ahead and go over December reads. In December so far, I have read 6 books. I only rated one of them below 5 stars, which is crazy because if you go back and watch my other videos or go on my TikTok to look at what I rated books from other months, I was definitely not rating. This ratio of 5 stars was not the case because I was not super pleased with some of the books I read earlier this year. But these last 2 months, November and December, did me right. The first book I finished in December was the one that I didn't like, and it was The Great Gatsby. I gave The Great Gatsby 2 stars. For so many reasons. I'm honestly amazed I finished it. If it wasn't a novella, I would not have finished it. It would never have gotten done. I have quite a few criticisms of this novel. First and foremost, I don't like reading racist characters written by white people. And I think, obviously, I set myself up for failure reading a classic and not liking that. I wanted to read it because of another author. I can't remember her name right now, but I'm going to put her book right here. She just released a cyberpunk novel inspired by The Great Gatsby, and I want to read that. But I was like, maybe I should finally read The Great Gatsby, get that out the way, so at least I know what she was basing it off of or inspired by. And I'm still going to read hers because I feel like she'll actually do the story justice, but I don't feel like the original did the story justice because there were so many opportunities for F. Scott Fitzgerald to dive into a couple different themes brought up throughout it, such as obsession, yearning, and wealth, and we just did it. I was reading and I was like, nothing's happening. We got to page 150 and I was like, okay, so maybe it'll happen soon. It'll be this one big thing that happens at the end of the book. and it just didn't. I mean, obviously something big happens at the end of the book, but it did not give the payoff I was looking for. It did not explore the themes I was hoping it would. I just felt like we glazed over everything, just barely glanced at it, and it was really, really, really frustrating. I may have been asking too much for it to go into detail and actually pick apart those themes, but I was just so disappointed. So I give The Great Gatsby 2 stars. I honestly probably could have just not read it and read her book instead and been much more satisfied. I cannot wait to read it. It's one of my most anticipated reads of 2026. Next, I finished Heated Rivalry and The Long Game. So about a week and a half, maybe 2 weeks ago now, the Heated Rivalry TV show edit started to take over my TikTok For You page. And I think I've talked a little bit about this in an earlier video, but I am not an adaptation person. I have a really hard time separating a book or series that I love from the show that is then made about it, and I'm usually pretty unhappy with it. Whether I was unhappy with The Shadow and Bone, there's been a few different, that's the one I can remember right now. I'm just not an adaptation person. But I kept seeing people who read the books being really, really happy and excited about this adaptation of these two romance novels. So I bought them both. And then I read them both in like 1 day or 2 days, I can't remember. I stayed up far too late reading because I was like, I'm gonna read the books first. I'm always a book first person, and then I'll watch the show and see what I think. I rated Heated Rivalry and The Long Game 5 stars each. They might be the best romance books I've read this year. I think they are. They're the best romance books I've read this year. The way that Rachel Reed wrote each of the characters, the way that she criticizes the NHL for their policies, and kind of the hockey world, like for not being as open-minded but starting to try and open it up. The way she wrote our main characters and the subtlety of the change in their relationships, so beautiful. Additionally, the way she wrote Rose and Svetlana, chef's kiss. Chef's freaking kiss. And it's so nice to not see the women depicted in a series like this as the antagonists, because neither of them were antagonists. I feel like whenever I read queer literature in the past, there's always somebody that's like this big antagonist, and the theoretical antagonist right now is really just the NHL and like their own internalized homophobia and whatnot. So I'm just so glad that Rachel Reed did not make Rose or Svetlana antagonists, and I'm glad that they were supportive women who loved these men as best friends and really provided that stability and that support that I think both of them needed at several points in the book. My thoughts about the adaptation are completely separate, but all I will say is it translated so much better to TV than I thought it was going to, because sometimes when you have a book or a story that takes place over such a length of time, because it starts in like 2008, I think, and I'm not sure what year it ends. I know it goes over 10 years. When you have that, it can be so hard to translate it onto TV, because how do you show the same subtle changes and adjustments with only 6 episodes and you're not inside of the character's head the way that you are in a book? But somehow Jacob Tierney, Hudson Williams, and Connor Story, they really did their big one, and they perfectly put it out there. Next, we read Everything is Tuberculosis by John Green. I had been wanting to read this for pretty much all year, but I was on the hold list for that long. Finally, the audiobook became available, and I finished it in 1 day because I just devoured it. It was so interesting. It was not at all what I expected, because I read The Anthropocene Reviewed by John Green earlier this year, which was a collection of essays about the Anthropocene. So I was kind of expecting a collection of essays about how tuberculosis has shaped our world, and that was not necessarily what I got. I did not expect him to dive into the ignorance and racism of the medical world and the developed world the way that he did. And he got extra points for it. I did rate this book 5 stars. The way John Green switches between giving us a historical context to telling us stories of people he knows and people he's known suffering from this illness, as well as the way that we are moving forward and backsliding, the possibilities in the future. It was really gripping, and it got me so emotionally invested in it. I went down like a tuberculosis rabbit hole once I finished it, because this book was only, I think the audiobook was only like 4 or 5 hours long. It was very short, and I listened to everything on like 1.5 or 1.75 speed. Our last nonfiction book of the month was Men Who Hate Women by Laura Bates. This is a novel about a woman who went undercover into the manosphere, which is a part of the internet where certain men in different communities kind of converge to hate women. It starts going chapter by chapter, part by part, talking about a different community. So first we start with incels, which are arguably the most widely known. Then we talk a bit about pickup artists and MGTOW, and it keeps going, and it goes like men who hate women, men who don't know they hate women. And she talks about the way that these thoughts that everybody kind of considers silly and not a big deal, how these ideologies are bleeding into our mainstream media through politicians, companies, celebrities, etc. The way that social media companies are not regulating because it pulls people in and it keeps them interested and keeps them scrolling. The radicalization of the youth and red pilling, what that means and how to combat it. It was such a terrifying read, if I'm completely honest. It was like reading a horror novel because, you know, we know that these communities exist. Like, I've heard the name incel before, I've heard of pickup artists and stuff, but to understand the true expanse of it and how far it has reached and how deeply it is beginning to affect our politics and our culture and society was just surreal, because everybody wants to dismiss it, to dismiss these communities as something small, like a little insect that's bothering us, when in reality they have such large memberships just of the actual registered users of these websites, not even talking about people who just happen to stumble across it and then stay unregistered and keep going deeper into it. It was a terrifying read, but it was really fascinating. I am excited to read her next book. I saw something about another book of hers called The New Age of Sexism, and that I've already placed a library hold for it. All right, finally, I finished this book last night. I talked a little bit about it on TikTok, but we finished Rule of Wolves by Leigh Bardugo. I gave this book 5 stars, and I have so much to say and think, but I don't even know how to get it all out there. I have been reading Leigh Bardugo's Grishaverse since I was 14, was when I first read Shadow and Bone, and I was obsessed. I immediately read Six of Crows after that. Again, obsessed. When King of Scars came out, I was still reeling from Six of Crows and from how that book had ended. So I didn't actually get to the series until this year. I think I read King of Scars back in like February, I want to say. And oh my gosh, the depth of this world that Leigh Bardugo has built, the politics, the dynamics, the characters and the relationships, and how the magic works, all of it. Having all of that knowledge built up from these separate series over the past 6 years of my life, and then it all converging, getting cameos from Six of Crows characters, refocusing on characters from the first series. It was just beautiful, and it was so well done and well written. I've always loved the way that Leigh Bardugo writes her characters, the diversity in her casts and in her world. I will say in this book we got another kind of diversity that we haven't really gotten before. She's always had several LGBTQIA characters. She's always been careful to represent several belief systems, several ethnicities, races, governments, etc. But in this novel, we got trans representation, and it was so, the idea of a trans character in a fantasy novel is something I'd never even considered. And seeing it done, it was done so perfectly. It fit into the story so well, using the magic and the dynamics of the world. I was just in awe. I couldn't believe what I was reading. And I'm excited to continue reading her other work. That is it for today's video. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you guys in the next video. As always, if you want to see more of me, like, subscribe, comment, let me know what you want to see. And you can always check me out on TikTok. My @ is Coffee with Chloe. I post there daily about writing, reading, shows I'm watching, etc. Bye!